I am Dung Hien Vien, though most people simply call me O Dung. Just a lowly journalist at one of the city's major newspapers, my workload is always heavier than everyone else's. Gathering news, writing articles, submitting reports. The same tedious routine over and over again. It wears on me, honestly. But still, making it to a grand city like Beijing isn't exactly something to scoff at. That morning, I had barely climbed out of bed when the phone rang. The moment I picked up, it was my mother's voice. Only this time, it didn't sound like her usual self. There was sorrow in her tone as she said, "Come home quickly. Meiba doesn't have much time left." Ever since second uncle passed away, the feeling of losing family had slowly faded. But now, hearing those words so suddenly, it felt like a handful of coarse salt had been shoved down my throat, clogging every breath. I set the phone down, heart pounding, and called my boss right away to request a few days off. Meiba wasn't really surnamed May. No one quite remembered what her actual surname was. She was simply known as the woman who cured illnesses, scraped wind, did acupuncture, and sometimes even chased away spirits. Her favourite tool was a thin bamboo tube, May. And over time, everyone just called her Meiba. She liked it that way. According to family lineage, she was technically my grandfather's aunt, which meant I could have called her something formal like great-grandaunt. But that was too cumbersome. So to all of us, she was simply Meiba. Every time someone called for her, she would shut her eyes tight before slowly opening them again, and then, with her bound feet wrapped in cloth, she would wobble forward one tiny step at a time. When I arrived home, I saw the sorrow etched deeply on my mother's face, a face I hadn't seen in a long time. And no wonder. Though the bloodline was distant, Meiba had touched the heads of nearly every child in the village. Not just us, the neighbouring children too. We had all grown up healthy under her quiet care. After a few exchanged words, Mother and I went to Meiba's house. There were already many people there, old and young, all silent, their faces solemn. The children bit their lips nervously. Meiba was inside, and no one dared disturb her. Mother led me in. Meiba was lying on her bamboo mat, a signature trait of hers. She had slept on that same mat for over 50 years, through summer and winter alike. It had turned red over time, stained by decades of use. I could hear her breathing, ragged and heavy. Mother and grandmother called to her, telling her I had arrived. Meiba had always doted on me the most, they said. Perhaps because I resembled her youngest son, the one she had loved and lost. Though she had cured many, her own life had been plagued by tragedy. Grandmother once told me she had 6 children who all died before their first birthday. When the 6th one passed, she went mad with grief, screaming and digging at the grave with her bare hands. Her 7th, the son she cherished most, was brilliant beyond his years. In the 1960s, he'd gotten into Tsinghua University. Everyone said her hard years were finally over, but then, during a riot in Beijing, he was struck by a stray bullet, killed instantly. The news shattered her. She went mute for a month, and then, as if nothing had happened, she rolled up her sleeves, picked up her needles and bamboo tube, and continued healing others. "Look, you and your mother go now. I want to be alone with Kung Kung," she suddenly said, her voice strained and hoarse yet steady. I was stunned. Grandmother had said she was near death, and yet here she was, sitting upright. But the way she sat made my heart ache. She was nothing but skin and bones. The movement sent her into a fit of coughing. "Look," that was my mother's childhood naft. Now it was just me and Meiba. I found a small stool and sat beside her, holding her hand tightly. Her skin was cold, fragile. I could feel every coarsen, every bony joint. Bony joint. Tears welled in her eyes as she used her other hand to gently stroke my hair, tremble alike. "So very alike," she whispered. "Meiba, please take care of yourself," I said, my nose stinging. I remembered thinking as a child that she was magical, that there was no illness she couldn't cure. I never imagined one day she would grow this old and this frail. "Kung, do you know why Grandma May wanted to speak with you alone?" Her voice was strained and heavy. I had to listen closely, guessing her meaning between breaths. I shook my head. Suddenly, she fumbled beneath her pillow and pulled out a book, though it didn't really look like one. "This contains the knowledge of my life, all the treatments and exorcisms I've known. I always saw you as Duklup, my son." Now that I'm leaving, I want to pass it to you. Read it if you want. If not, burn it." She coughed harshly after speaking, then closed her eyes. I called out to her, but she only waved her hand, motioning for me to leave. 4 hours later, Grandma May passed away. Every day after, people came to visit her coffin. On the day of her burial, it felt like the entire village showed up. I remembered a saying, "If you want to know if someone lived a good life, look at how many people attend their funeral." She came into this world alone and left the same way. After putting away her book, I rushed to join the funeral, and once it ended, I returned to my office. As soon as I finished work, I opened the thing she left for me. It wasn't a book, more like an old notebook, the writing disordered and ancient, pages stained yellow-brown. It was written in brush calligraphy, vertically aligned. For someone to have written so much in that style, she must have been rare in her time. Reading it was tough. I began copying it word by word, but the more I transcribed, the more I felt uneasy. It wasn't medicine. It was sorcery, more like exorcist records than healing notes. It seemed she had learned this from an old neighbour in secret. They say learning such things requires talent and fate. She even wrote about how she began banishing spirits in her youth and how it may have caused her children to die young. She wasn't like in the movies. No summoning storms or gods, but she could do things we couldn't. Her writing often used strange local dialects. I consulted many to decipher them and managed a rough translation. Auntie came, carrying a little boy, 7 or 8 years old, under her arm. His eyes stared blankly like a wooden doll. The weather was freezing, yet green mucus dripped from his nose, and he didn't feel it. In the end, Auntie Sow had to wipe it for him. Understood. Here is the English narration of your passage in a haunting, horror-appropriate tone. No additions, no omissions. I vaguely sensed that the child had been possessed. Sure enough, Aunt Sow told me the boy was the son of her older sister. His parents had gone off to make a living and left him in her care. At first, the child had been lively, energetic, full of life. But last week, he suddenly changed. There was nothing else they could do, so they came to me. I hesitated. I didn't want to get involved. The elders always said, if a married woman wants to have children, she must never meddle in these things or disaster will befall her own. But that was just an old tale. I looked at the child, and I agreed. Just as I always did, I asked everyone else to leave. Then I brought the boy into my room. It was narrow, barely enough space for 4 or 5 people. There was no electric light. The windows were sealed all year round. Inside, there was only an altar to Guan Yin and a few candles that always burned. I lit incense to Guan Yin. Then I took out my May tube, filled with consecrated rice, and gently waved it in front of the child's face. When I was little, I remembered she had done the same to me when I had a high fever, and it worked. I held the boy's left hand. Between his thumb and index finger, there was a dark green vein, thick as an earthworm, bulging violently. Without a doubt, he had been frightened. Children's souls are fragile. A shock or a scare can cause their spirit to flee. If not too much time has passed, it can still be summoned back. Expel the ghost. Use acupuncture to clear the blood path. That would do it. I opened the May tube. The rice in the centre had sunken down. The edges rose around it, but there were 3 small pits. I opened his mouth. Under the dim candlelight, I could see a blister on his tongue. Normally, this was just a fever. I would lance it with a silver needle, press 2 more points, and the child would be fine. But I might have been wrong. But Grandma May knew acupuncture. She had learned from a well-known local doctor. I picked up the needle and moved behind him, ready to pierce the dew point between the shoulder blades, right along the small intestine meridian. Then suddenly, he started laughing. But it wasn't a child's laugh. It sounded like a grown woman. "What are you laughing at, sweetie?" I asked. "Let me give you the needle. It won't hurt. You'll feel better soon." I reached forward. The boy slowly turned his head, and when it reached his shoulder, crack! His head twisted completely around, his eyes locked onto mine, and in the corners of his mouth, drool. I collapsed onto the ground. Not even a scream could escape me. If you want the next section, just send it in. I'll continue in the same style. Understood. Here is your provided passage, translated and narrated in English, with a haunting horror tone. No additions, no omissions. You saved someone else's child, then give yours to me. It suddenly said something strange. I closed my eyes. When I opened them again, the child was still sitting calmly in front of me, his back to me, motionless. I slowly stood up, walked around to face him. Nothing had changed. I thought I had imagined it. Following the usual method, I applied a few more needles to the nerves beneath his neck and under his arms. The child recovered quickly. That night, nothing unusual happened. Auntie was overjoyed. She took the child home. Before leaving, the boy turned back and smiled at me. That smile chilled me to the bone. In the first few days, I was shaken. I told myself I wouldn't treat anyone again. But nothing happened. Time passed, and I slowly forgot. Soon after, I gave birth to Dilup, my firstborn son. He was pale, round, healthy. The whole family rejoiced. But by June, one morning I awoke and found his face purple. I was a healer, I knew. He couldn't be saved, but I still screamed for help, clung to him in desperation. In the end, Dilup died. On his face was a stiff, unnatural smile. Later, I realized it was the same smile as that child. Back then, I hadn't remembered the words that child had said. I blamed it on fate, but that was just the beginning. In the 10 years that followed, I had 5 more children. All died in infancy. The oldest didn't even live to see 1 year. By the 6th, I poured everything I had into raising it. The child grew well. I thought the curse had passed. But one summer night, I heard someone calling me from outside. When I stepped out, no one was there. And when I returned, the baby had stopped breathing. I went mad. These children were my flesh and blood. It was like peeling the skin from my bones. I started to doubt everything, every child over the past 10 years. But it was too late. Soon, I was pregnant again. I threw away every piece of clothing, every item that belonged to the lost ones. I told myself, this time I would start over. This time I would raise this child as if he were my first. When Dilup was born, I gave everything I had left to raise him. But from the moment he came into this world, he never stopped crying, day and night. The sound, shrill, piercing. I tried everything. Nothing worked. I began to feel afraid. I began to regret that I had ever treated that child. If you'd like me to continue, send the next part. I will read it in the same chilling tone. Understood. Here is the passage you provided, translated and narrated in English, keeping a haunting, suspenseful tone, word for word with no additions. It wasn't until that day. A neighbour of ours, a tall, strong man from the northeast, he had always been kind to us. That night, he was on the night shift, but the child was still crying. I was trying to soothe him when suddenly the man stormed over like a wrathful god. He bellowed, crying and crying. What are you crying for? A funeral? His voice froze me in place. Then he rushed over and slapped Dilup across the face. Immediately, the crying stopped. I thought the boy had been knocked unconscious, but from that moment on, he never cried again. He grew up healthy, but that man soon after fell bedridden. He never got up, and not long after, he died. Then one by one, his family members grew ill and died. I knew whatever was inside Dilup had transferred. The northeastern man became the one to bear it. When Dilup grew older, I took him to kneel at the man's grave. I told him this was the person to whom he owed his life, our great benefactor. Though my heart still ached, I couldn't deny I was filled with relief. I thought my son was free, but that was only what I believed. Dilup was exceptional, more than I ever imagined. So exceptional it made me uneasy. I wasn't a clever woman. His father was just a quiet basket weaver, yet this child was brilliant from birth. Too brilliant. But he never smiled. His face was always stiff, except with me. With others, he barely spoke. I continued to help our neighbours, healing their ailments. My reputation only grew. And before the Cultural Revolution began, he was accepted into Tsinghua University. Before he left, he and I talked late into the night. He held my hand and said, "You and Father have raised me with so much hardship. I will study hard and repay you." What joy could compare to hearing such words from your own child? That night, we recalled all his childhood memories together. In Beijing, he occasionally sent home colour photographs. At that time, photos were still rare. Most were black and white. I was eager to see if he looked thinner. But when I looked at the photo, I froze. In that smile, and was one I knew too well. It was the same smile I had seen many times before. My vision went dark. That smile seemed to mock me. mock my ignorance and my foolishness. Like a woman possessed, I tried to get to Beijing, but the Cultural Revolution swept through the country. People like me, they called us witches, spirit women. We were denounced. I didn't care how they insulted me. I only begged, let me go to Beijing, let me see my son, but it was useless. 6 months later, news of Duklup's death reached us. This time I didn't cry, but his father was overwhelmed with grief. He too soon passed away. For the following week, I locked myself in the house. One thought filled my mind. I healed people. I did good deeds. I saved lives. Was that also a sin? From that moment on, I refused to treat any more children. No matter how they begged, how they cursed, I turned them all away. Let me know when you're ready for the next segment. I'll continue the narration just as requested.
Toi Cung Tung Dun Tim Thim, Hoi Ve Chien Kua Duatrachea Ve Sao Rat Koe Mon, Bei Jio Van the Trong Long Toi Tho Ong De Chu Han Chut. Colon Yai Nu Toi Kong Nen Ko Kan Chao, Hoak Noi Tat Kanung Duatre Tung Duok Toi Chua Tri Deo La Kan Chao Kua Toi. Doi Kai Toi Da Ni Thong Swat, Lai Bat Dao Gup Du Nung Duatre Dang Tien Nai, Lam Het Kanong Kua Toi Da Tro Gup. Toi Ko The O Tren Yai Nung Duatre Nai Tim Duok Nung Thu Toi Da Mat. Toi Dok Dan Day, Fat Hien Ben Trong Kep Tu Yai, The Rat Chunat, Song Tin Chat Kua Yai Kong Toi, Toi Kan Than Mo Ra, Win Lala Ha Iat Vi Chom Ku Kua Ko Than Yai, Kon Gi Lai Ha Iat Vi Chin Now Tri Lo Ibnh Nai. Thu Nai Toi Kong Hu Lam, Ni Tham Cho K Wine Yan Trove Cho Kao 80. Mat Sao Kon Gi Lai Ratten Yeo Kao Tu Yen Ba Lam The Now Chua Bnh Cho Nung Duatre, Dida De Ugyong Now, Nu Cam Nong, Sot Kao Tim Mi Bon Yeun Yet, Kai Kan Den Mo Landa Mi Ba Gim Mo Chom, Dem Gon Kot Noi Long Mo Chut, Toan Than Lin De Chu, That Su La Than KY. Mo Ta Koi Sok Rat Hap Dia An Toi, Phia Tren Viet Lam The Now Dung Mi Goi Qui. Do La Wen Yan Mi Ba Duok Goi La Mi Ba. Dung Ong Truk Dung Mi, Louis Om Toi Mwala Totten Yet. Levi Trang Gom Nuok Swa, Foi Cho Amu, Tua Kai Lam La Can Phi Tin Than Tin Tom, Dem Vi Trang De Tranong, Dung Hai Te Che Zung Quan. Ung Oi Tua Ban. Tin Tom Nham Mat. Trong Long Neem Duk Sin Yo Nex Ung Kua Qui Kai Kon Song, Kong the Goid and Kok. Sao Kai Ong Mi Line Len Lod Wok. De La Quatran Kua Ong Mi, Ben Con Do Con Phi Yen Han Trong Can Fon Toi Den. Han Nua Phia Tran Noi Dung Gao Mwak Wi Cung Chua Chok Se Ton Kong, Noi Ko the Dem Vat Phom Nyai Chet Su Dung Kai Kon Song Devout Rong Ong Ko Hoi Se Lo En Han Chut. Han Nua Tua Kai Qui Rawati Kong the Buong Te Che Ong Mi Ra, Cung Kong the De Lo Lop Vi.
I followed the instructions written in her notebook. I used the very same bamboo tube that Grandma Mi had used while she was alive. In my heart, I called out her name, Meiba. And then, the tube began to turn cold. So cold I could barely hold it, like a solid block of ice. Low rattling, faint whish. Inside, the grains of rice were trembling, bouncing, boiling over without heat, but the cloth covering the tube didn't move at all. Just as I was about to let go, a figure appeared across the table, blurry, like a shadow forming in mist. My eyes stung from the swirling air, but slowly that shadow became clear. It was her. It was truly Grandma Mi. Her face was pale, a little darker than I remembered, but unmistakably her. I couldn't help but call out, Meiba! I stood up, wanted to run to her, but she raised her hand, stopped me, smiled. She didn't speak, just sat there, watching me. Grandma Mi, can't you talk? She nodded. She couldn't speak, not from where she was now, but it was enough just to see her again. Grandma Mi, I whispered. You're gone now. But what if the children here fall ill again? What if it's not just a cold, but something darker? Who will help them now? She smiled, pointed at me. Me? She nodded again, and then she gave me a thumbs up. The bamboo tube in my hands began to warm. Her image started to fade, slowly blurring, melting into the air. I knew she was leaving. I stood, reached out, let go of the cloth, and in a blink, she was gone. I stood there in silence, staring at the tube. The white cloth had lifted slightly. Inside, the rice was spinning, twisting like an hourglass, whirling at incredible speed. Then, slowing, I flipped through the book in a panic, looking for a way to bring her back. And there it was. One line that struck like a blade. If you let go before it ends, you'll never call that soul again. I'd lost her, forever. At the very last page of Grandmammy's notebook, there was a hidden pouch. Inside, more than 10 silver needles, the same ones she'd used for years to treat the sick. Tucked deeper in the pouch, a faded photograph. I pulled it out. On the back, in elegant handwriting, were the words, "To the mother I love most." I turned the photo over. A tall young man wearing glasses posing in front of the Tsinghua University gates, smiling. Could this be her son? I brought it closer into the light. My heart dropped. My hands trembled. He looked just like me. Too much like me. But his smile! That smile! It felt wrong. Unnatural, forced. And then, as sunlight hit the photo, something changed. A settled distortion like film crackle. The surface shimmered, warped slightly, as if reacting. I stepped back. I didn't want to damage it. This was Maybar's relic after all, but when I flipped the picture over again, I froze. My breath caught in my throat. Two pale hands, ghastly white, reaching out from behind the boy. Gripping his face! Slow 10-string! They were pulling at his cheeks, stretching his mouth into that awful smile. I screamed and dropped the photo to the floor.